So our last session focused predominantly on North Asia, and certainly that's been, and China, I suppose, more specifically, has been the story in terms of projected increased demand. Yet, interestingly enough, a lot of the indicators around both current and future growth in terms of demand are in fact related to ASEAN and South Asia. And that's the region and some of the discussion we're going to have next. So our first, we've got three speakers, two from the industry perspective and one from Austrade's perspective. And our first speaker is Patrick Kearins, who's the State Director of South Australia from Austrade. And he's been in quite a few trade posts in South Asia and around the world over a long period of time, including a period in India for 4 years. So I'm sure Patrick will give us some very interesting insights into trade issues, particularly in relation to that very difficult nut to crack, which is trade access to India. So please welcome Patrick.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick. And it's good to be here. It's nice to be in the room with everyone. Though the amount of time that I've spent offshore, I have to confess that I am feeling the cold. I've managed to spend so far a decade without an Australian winter. And it's bloody cold in Canberra, regardless of what you say, Mick, it's cold. I recently returned from 4.5 years in Mumbai, where I also had coverage of Pakistan and Bangladesh. And then before that, I spent 5.5 years in Indonesia. And in part of that time, I spent about 2 to 3 years leading Pan-ASEAN teams. So that's why I'm here. It's not because that I'm based in Adelaide, it's because I've just come back from the region that we're talking about. I was lucky in all of those locations to be able to work with customers across agribusiness and food, which is what Austrade does, and in particular work with a range of Australian companies who are looking to grow or to increase their business in those markets. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm planning to just go through some of the current trade flows with South Asia and in ASEAN, and also some of the opportunities that we see across these markets. I just want to, given it's after lunch and we'll just refresh a few memories, just want to touch back on some of the things that many of the speakers this morning have touched on, in particular about the opportunity for growing Australian agricultural exports, and particularly those relating to food. Graham started, and then it has been picked up by a number of speakers, that the opportunity to grow the value of our exports far exceeds perhaps the opportunity to grow the volume of our exports. And the two key parts that we see in achieving this are really being to position Australia as a leader in meeting regional food security concerns, and also ensuring that we're a preferred supplier and the preferred source of high quality food for consumers with the income who choose to have high quality food. Sai spoke about it. I think every one of the speakers has mentioned something to that effect. We also, that's come out of this morning's presentations, is the need to, I think, be more effectively and closely engaged with our customers, and in particular their markets, not just our customers, but who they're servicing. And Adam from Cotton Australia, I think, gave a great example of that, being able to articulate to the user the benefit in the product. The need to become more integrated into global food supply chains, and of course to have a more unified and national voice in the messaging to support both existing business, but importantly to win new business. And from our point of view, from Austrade's point of view, if we get this right, what we'll do is we'll actually secure our markets. We'll secure them by being an integrated partner, working to deliver what our customer wants and what their customer wants, and ultimately that'll grow the margins for our exporters as well as our producers. The overall drivers have been spoken about a number of times this morning. It's really the growing demand for food, as Graham referred to it, that lifestyle element, but then also that living element, the ever-increasing pressures on food production and securing basic food needs. And to capture these, we really need to be better at marketing ourselves and ensuring that when organisations like Citrus Australia when Judith and her members are promoting themselves, that they're being supported by coordinated efforts across Australian premium foods, regardless of category, that we've got that consistent messaging which everyone can leverage. Touching on the food security, we can also offer ourselves as a neighbour, as a nation to our neighbours who are interested to make sure that their food security concerns are met. And we can do this by not just offering our grains, but also our brains, by working with them through our service delivery, through our research, and also our training. And all of those elements underpin that overall messaging about our quality, the capacity that we have in Australia to deliver great food. When we look at South Asia and ASEAN, there are a couple of things that I think are really important to start with. Important in how we view them as regions, but also in how we view them as individual markets. So I'll start with the similarities. South Asia and ASEAN sit alongside North Asia as the three regions that are regularly referenced today as being critical to the future of Australia's economic prosperity. They're all separately large. Each one is growing at amazing rates, and each has economies which are complementary to our own. When you look at South Asia and ASEAN, they both attract significant amounts of investment and are becoming increasingly interlinked. In 2013, ASEAN as a region matched China as the leading destination for foreign global investment, both attracting 8% of the total FDI flows. And China in its own right is becoming one of the largest sources of investment in ASEAN, and the ASEAN economies have been the leading and the first and then repeat investors into China, and India actually, so that interlinking is very evident. Both South Asia and ASEAN have young populations. It's spoken about quite a bit. The importance of the young population, though, is the recognition that that population is going to drive not just the economic prosperity and growth of those markets, but importantly their consumption. We're actually dealing with a consumer base who is still an average age of just 20. And now the differences. South Asia and ASEAN as regions, and particularly their individual member nations, are all at different stages of economic development. And as you guys in the room know, you can't book a cargo to Asia, and you can't locate Asia as a single country on a map. And each one of those markets have different preferences, and more importantly perhaps, they're seeking to be able to satisfy those preferences in quite often very different ways. When we compare the markets to one another, the differences really start to come to the fore. Our agriculture and food trade with ASEAN is already very strong. It accounts for some 40% of our wheat exports and the bulk of our live export trade, while our big six ASEAN markets of Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines and Vietnam are critical to both our horticulture as well as our dairy exports. And in comparison, the value of our agriculture and food exports to South Asia is currently significantly less and is largely concentrated in a few areas such as pulses. It becomes a bit more highlighted when we separate premium food from staple items. And as I just mentioned, I think this chart speaks to nations being at different stages of economic development and obviously of having different consumption patterns. So what we're seeing here is the chart that shows our current food exports only, across South Asia and ASEAN. And on the far left we have India, where our current exports are predominantly concentrated in nuts, while the recent market access for our sheep meat is just starting to register. You can see a hint of blue on top there. It's not just an error, there is a hint of blue. Vietnam is showing its continuing emergence, registering across all of the categories apart from seafood. We're in the middle of the chart in Singapore and Malaysia, perhaps the most balanced of the diets, showing across our lamb, our beef, our dairy, our seafood, as well as our fruit lines. And as we've spoken about, I think a bit earlier, Indonesia's appetite for red meat protein is clearly evident if you look at the line on the far right. So if you look at India, when we look at India in isolation, the current opportunity really matches the development of the supporting food infrastructure in country. You've got wealthy consumers who are driven by strong cultural preferences for food type, as well as a general desire to see value across their consumption. But they're looking for products that match their international knowledge and desire for quality. The opportunity in India has been through food service, which is the more developed avenue into the market, into both the hotel as well as independent restaurant chains, and wine has really led the way. Australian labels feature strongly across both entry and mid price points, but in the last 2 years there's been a noticeable increase in premium labels available in the market. Now, in a market like India, where they largely look to Europe for premium food products, building on a beachhead that our wine producers have been able to create really does help us to sell the story around our capability and our quality. And 2 years ago, when we gained access for our sheep meats into India, that's exactly what we did. We partnered with the wine story and market through food service to be able to create some presence on menus across the country. Another aspect is the growth of India's own high-end food retailers, which is creating opportunities, but more in gourmet shelf lines. Now, all of these are going to start with small volumes, but they do have quite strong upside. And I guess that story is not too dissimilar to how we've built markets across North Asia and ASEAN over the last 30 years. Dairy in India presents an opportunity, and a very large opportunity. The question is the timing of that opportunity. Oh, excuse me, let me go back. So the dairy industry in India is such that India is currently a significant exporter. And as we've heard about from Charlie this morning, our key export markets are North Asia, they're across Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And the example of China having surpassed Japan recently as our most important and largest dairy product market. If you look at an ABARES forecast which estimates out to 2050, what is predicted is that that will flip. Not only will India have surpassed China as the world's largest, or as the country that has the appetite for the most dairy in the world, the scale of that is quite significant. So in 2050, it's forecast that China is going to import some $15 billion worth of product, whereas India is forecast of needing almost $50 billion worth of product. Now, our production constraints mean that we're only going to be able to participate in a relatively small part of that total market when it emerges. And to give some quantum, our total exports from Australia at the moment account for something less, or around the order of 3% of India's dairy market today. But I think you can see that, similar to the success we've been having in China across our premium dairy lines, similar opportunity is going to exist in India. Now, 35 years is a long time to wait, but if you're realistic about doing business in India, you need to start doing business today to be able to capitalise on what's predicted in 35 years. Again, drawing the comparison to China, not too dissimilar to going into China a decade and 2 decades ago. At the moment, the Indian dairy industry is looking to restructure. And if our industry is able to partner with the Indian dairy industry as it seeks to move towards a model which we're more familiar with, both in terms of scale as well as breed, then it'll allow our industry to develop products which will match the market. And it also has the potential for us to start to develop distribution channels in market, so that when India emerges as a dominant force in dairy consumption, driven by a very powerful consumption class, then our industry is already there and has got an avenue into market. So partnering to be able to provide commercial services for herd improvement, as well as research and development around animal nutrition and management, has proven successful in markets around India, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka and in Bangladesh. And if we, as I said, if we're able to do that in India, then the ability to tailor product and maximise distribution channels in time is really ours. When we look at the ASEAN markets, there's a much broader range of opportunities across premium food. Our efforts, Austrade's efforts, has been really focused on identifying gaps in the market and working to introduce Australian supply, as well as working to improve how we promote Australia's capability across the markets. As an example, in Thailand and in the Philippines and in Indonesia, we've been working with the Victorian government and the horticultural industry to deliver a promotional campaign called Australia Now in Season. The campaign really is focused on promoting Australian premium fruit in market when each of the lines become available against the season. And Citrus Australia has just joined as a partner in the campaign, and it's something that we really are looking to expand further in the coming years ahead. And echoing this morning's session with Graham, our work to present how Australia's food safety and integrity system operates, how it connects different parts of the sector and the complementary role of both the federal and the state governments, is really all about delivering a single picture of Australia's food safety and our food quality. That story helps us to position our industry to win more business in markets like Vietnam and Myanmar, and also provides a pathway for Australian companies to participate in country as the local industry seeks to develop and expand. And similar to the work in dairy development across South Asia, in Pakistan and Sri Lanka I just mentioned, if we're able to participate with the right partner in helping them develop their own food security, it gives us the potential to expand our distribution channels for our products across a much broader region. In Singapore, Australia's strong performance across the retail channel positions our products well, particularly as local and international retailers in market continue to drive to increase the quality of their range. Whether that's dairy farmers or NTUC, they're all on the same bent again at the moment. And there's also room for further improvement and growth into the premium food service channel. In Indonesia, the comparatively more difficult market access conditions at the moment, what we're doing is supporting Australian businesses that are already successful in the market, trying to position them so that they can gain more market share. And also continuing the story about our Australia's food story so that our industry is really well positioned for when those access conditions change again, when they ease again, that we're able to take advantage of what is a market that's already looking to diversify but is a bit constrained. In our efforts to maximise the distribution channels for Australian products, we're also looking to leverage Australia's strong performance in the Japanese market by working more closely with Japanese retailers with operations across Southeast Asia. We're going to use our relationship with some of these retailers, the likes of Aeon, so that our food exporters who have, in many cases, long-standing success with the retailers in Japan can fill the same role in offering their products across Southeast Asia. When we look at staple foods, we're of course looking at a significant part of our agricultural trade. And similar to the previous chart, I think this one helps to tell a story about markets, different stages of development and preferences. The demand for pulses in South Asia stands out, as does the absence of a domestic wheat crop, coupled with Southeast Asia's acceptance of wheat-based foods. And again, Indonesia's demand for red meat protein dwarfs all others in the region. Now, the trading operations for the staple foods that we produce in Australia, they're large, they're efficient, they're well established, and as you might expect, Austrade doesn't play a significant part in those transactions, apart from linking new customers into supply networks as well as helping customer relationships when they're needed. However, I do want to touch on three areas that Austrade's working more closely, where we see potential upside for the industry and in particular for Australian producers. The first area is where the market values differentiation, and by that I mean where the market values the benefits that can arise from a particular source of product or its supplier. Value can be delivered through tailoring specifications to individual customer needs, through greater segregation of product, or even through single source origin. It also includes the work to prove the health benefits of a product, such as the recent research in China, which proves the superior nutritional outcomes from Australian oats. Part of building this value is bringing together the broader pitch to customers about Australia's competitive advantage across commodities, and we've spoken about that this morning. Promoting attributes that differentiate us from our competitors, both food safety, food quality, but even things such as the low moisture content of our wheat and pulses, or even the sweetness of our desi chickpeas compared to our competitors. The second area is addressing information gaps, where our industry isn't getting the information that it needs about customer choices and preferences, or conversely, where key people in market are perhaps out of touch or not informed of Australia's capability and what we're able to deliver for them. Now, emerging markets provide the majority of cases where this occurs, though it also happens in more established markets. And one example is in the wheat market in the Philippines, where we have the opportunity to shift supply to human consumption market and away from feed wheat, for which we're currently known. We've been working with AGIC to deliver the message of what Australia can deliver at a national level, and in that work, working to inform both the Philippine customers and government about our ability to meet their technical needs. The third area, which is particular to Southeast Asia, is really around our freight cost advantage for some of our cargoes, and in particular about a $15 to $20 advantage we have for our wheat crop into Indonesia compared to the North American crop. Now, it's not a great point, but it does talk to our proximity and the advantage of that proximity and the message that Australia is a reliable partner across Southeast Asia and that we really do want to work together to be able to secure our broader neighbourhoods' food security. The final point I want to touch on is free trade agreements. We've spoken this morning about the Korea and Japan agreements and the China agreement when it's signed and comes into force, and there's a lot of optimism about those agreements at the moment. But as we've heard, there's also the inevitable questioning about the timing of that tariff reduction and the ease on quota restriction. So I don't want to go into this diagram apart from to draw your attention to the nucleus that's represented, and that nucleus being ASEAN. The point of that nucleus is that we have had trade agreements into some of the ASEAN markets for a while. Malaysia came into force 5 years ago, Thailand came into force 10 years ago, and the broader agreement and the Australia-ASEAN-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement came into force 5 years ago as well. So what that means is that today, access into these markets is far greater than it was a couple of years ago. Later this year, we'll see the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community, and that has the potential to maximise the individual as well as the ASEAN-wide FTAs that we have in place. In particular, delivering easier access across the ASEAN markets as standards become increasingly common, including for things like labelling. The establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community really will create a truly regional hub on our doorstep. And as we've already heard, in South Asia, Minister Robbs placed a high priority on concluding a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement with India. Now, this agreement has the potential to bring our economies closer together than ever before, and ideally, we'll be able to make the transacting of business far easier as it addresses a whole range of tariff and behind-the-border measures. Now, to sum up, Austrade, we're very positive about the prospects for increasing both our agricultural trade and our food trade with South Asia and with the ASEAN markets. Now, the type of opportunity within the markets is diverse. It ranges across higher value foods, as we've touched on, staple foods, as well as for our agricultural equipment, our technology, our skills and our services. The time when the markets will deliver the biggest impact to Australia is also quite varied, with Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand and the Philippines our most prospective current markets, and those like Vietnam and Indonesia already significant and poised for much greater growth and much greater diversity of their needs, while markets like India and Myanmar emerge from quite different bases, and India in particular has the potential to be a significant market for Australia in the decades and multiple decades ahead. Thank you.